Let's fix a few things to make sure everything is okay. Centralizing. Let's fix it. To start the live, 2 minutes, we start today's live. Right now, it's just adjusting the cameras, and now we're starting today's live, 2 minutes. We will have to talk about being and being. Before, there was a group that said to be or not to be is the question. To be or not to be, that is the question. Today, we are going to talk about being and being, a great conflict that we have in being and being. How is this? How does it work? And so on. Let's detail this. How does it live? How do we live? How do we works on these two ways of being and existing? In a minute, we'll be starting. Quick game. To be and to be. We always try to bring up some strong themes that change the concepts a little. For us to be remade every day, to be a new creature every day. This is the idea we have. Okay, it's 8 p.m. I'm on an adventure, and today is May 14th, 2025. Title of today's Live. The great conflict of being and being. Being here is involved with being the living being that you are, and being is the element that you will assume in each of these positions. Okay, let's go. Look, sometimes people say like this, if you go to religious, mystical to being, I know, right? And sometimes not being has that some errors and some errors want to usurp the being to be the being in. We are going to work exactly on your living being, body living being, okay? And the being is on top of doing something. The being is being a tool of a doing, being a feeling, being a brain metabolism indicated for something. Let's go. But let's differentiate between being and being. This is very important. First of all, I'm going to differentiate between being and being. To be is to serve, to be secular and democratic. The being is secular and democratic. Jackson, but how can the being be secular and democratic? Does he have the options? No. Secular and democratic is because he does not have an attached religion. Take a being, let's think of a living being, which is another mammal. Elephant, ox, monkey, ape is a primate, but it is another mammal. It is a secular and democratic being. It will get along with others. It will stay in groups. It is a secular and democratic being. So the being we are talking more as a living being, not a being I. The being I is already a being. I am Jackson. I am an engineer. I am a man. I am a woman. I am a doctor. I am. But the self is a formation that he is already a conservative Republican. He has to remain self. Yes, does he exist as me? It seems confusing, but we will clarify this well today, okay? So the important thing is for you to differentiate the self from the being. The self is a tool. Let's suppose that you If you could remember when you were 1, 2, 3 years old, I know it's difficult, I don't remember, but those individuals who were 1, 2 years old were basically a being trying to express themselves. But when they learned something, when they learned a way to do something, it was a self trying to do it, even with little language, even with little brain formation. The self is what does. The being is the presence. It's where it emanates from. It's where the self comes from. Without the living being, there is no self. That's the idea. So what will the self do? We'll come back in a little while and you'll understand this. The self will do the following. The being is completely open. The self learns and will separate what is right from wrong. I distance right from wrong. I am a self that will do what I think is right, or for fun, I will do what is wrong. But that is not the case because the self will consolidate the criteria of what is right and what is wrong. The self has learned. So if I learn within a religion what is right and what is wrong, I will say that suddenly the other one is wrong. Look here, the being is secular. The being would encompass all possible forms of religion as long as it was democratic, as long as it was a religion that added value to everyone involved. The self no longer does. The self will already do something that is right or wrong. It separates the two, it consolidates something much more personal. The self is a normative arrangement. It is a public thing. The self is an organized public thing. The self is a function. And it's a conservative function of keeping yourself, you know? So sometimes you can get lost. Man, the self is important because I give you an identity. Yeah, but it's a tool. And the self is a conservative function, but it is by function that it is conservative. So whenever you have a self, you will be conservative. And whenever you leave the self, the whole self will have a focus of attention. It will put a little pressure on you. We will talk about this in a little while. And the self will try to focus on you to keep being the self. The way I see it, you have a legion of selves within you for one living being that is you. Do you understand this? A legion of selves. Every moment you have a metabolism all day long, day and night. You go to sleep, you wake up, you eat, you are hungry, you do all your needs. Over the course of 24 hours, your being, which is your body, changes its metabolism. It changes its metabolism. And within each moment, when this being is going to do something, it uses a self, a rule, a way, a learning, a way of doing it. It is the self that does it. The being is something more immanent. The being is presence. The self is the doing. Understand? This is important for you to feel. The being, it is a living body in the territory, and I call it apos. And I will explain to you this apos, which is important. You know that I accept the concept of the Damasian mind. The concept of the Damasian mind talks about interoception, which is the deep visceral sense, and proprioception, the perception of the body in space. Okay, but then I extend proprioception and also extend the visceral sense, interoception. I will extend proprioception to a later concept. What is this later concept? Proprioception is my body position in space. I can close my eyes and feel my body position in space, but I open my eyes. I have an image of what space is like, and I place my body with movement restrictions within certain spaces underwater, in a desert, on top of a tree, inside a church, in the bathroom, in the living room, at a football game. I always place my space by adapting my body to the space where I'm inserted. In this space where I'm inserted, I also place a feeling, a restriction. Inside the church at a religious event, I will not shout. Unless those screams have to do with the praise of that church, then you also restrict your feelings. When you restrict your feelings, you put pressure on your viscera. You also put pressure on, you tense your postural muscles. Your entire postural structure is more tense for the environment you are in. So what do? You tense your viscera, the visceral parts, and you also add postural, and you also change your proprioception. So you change your proprioception, you change your interoception. Hey, if I change my proprioception and interoception, my mind has changed. That's the self. The self will always change the mind. The self, each self is a different self in each environment. The self that studies, the self that plays, the self that speaks, the self that runs, the self that sleeps, the self that wakes up, the self that is hungry. All selves are different because they will involve proprioception, the position of the body in the space where it is perceived, including in dreams, which are dreamlike spaces, but you perceive, you will have a restriction. In a dream, there will be no restriction on feelings because there is a flexibility of feelings at that moment during REM sleep, but you will have your perception, even if it is visual, of your body posture. In a dream, there is, you do not move your body. Of course, you do not move because you are dreaming. You do not move, right? But most of us do not move our bodies. And at that moment, your mind is different because there is a space where you perceive yourself, your own perception. And I am in a position within that space, your own perception, and within the extended space. And you also have interoception, deep feeling. Yes, but a feeling comes and covers the deep feeling. So if I go to in being, the being would simply be feeling its position and feeling, but now a feeling comes, it already rises. The feeling, it places more attention on interoception, and your perception of positioning in space and your learning already does what I call after appearing. Then the apos comes in and it's extended proprioception. What's the difference? Let's put it, because sometimes the technical part scares you a little more, but let's see the difference. The self and the being have differences that are fairly basic. For example, the being wants to flow. Being would be when you are in the fullness of that connectomy that I call role. Remember the connectomy that you are in transcendence, in flow, in metacognition, flowing. You are in a flow. Of course, in high performance, some elements, some people can achieve flow even while doing something in a self. That is not the case now. The being wants to flow. The self, it wants to exist. The self replicates what it was because it maintains its identity in what it was, in what it learned, in what is right and what is wrong. When you learn what is right and what is wrong, you will define and will seek to choose one of the two to do. This is a self. So what happens? The being wants to flow, the self wants to repeat. The being he welcomes. The being is maternal, the being is body territory, the being, it perceives itself in this flock, in this school. I'm thinking of flocks of birds, schools, swarms of bees. The being perceives itself. I always talk to you about corium sensing, which is the perception that it has, and scientific studies talk about it, with the exception of bacteria, but it also exists in cells, which is when the same information goes to all the cells. This same information arriving in all the cells, they move together. They do things together. If you put it in the egg that the egg passed, remember the egg that was duplicating, duplicating, duplicating. At some point, this duplication of the egg would become tissue. It is a tissue, and suddenly the quantity of those cells begins to differentiate. We are talking about choriogenesis, based on choriogenesis, how tissues and cells differentiate because it takes the information that arrives in the cell after a certain number of cells. The tissue itself perceives itself. How many cells are there? The set of bacteria itself, you realize how many there are by the molecules that are interacting between them, and suddenly they all start to light up together. something that our mind sometimes doesn't grasp because it's a very cellular thing. It's more of a property of cells, but it is a property where belonging comes to me. At that moment, there is belonging. Why am I saying this? Because look, the being, it welcomes. It is the whole, the being, it blends with the landscape. It is what Freud spoke of as the oceanic sensation. Of course, Freud spoke of it after he had contact with Amerindian cultures. After he had contact with the experience of body territory, he spoke of the oceanic sensation. Yes, that is the being, oceanic sensation. And the self, select, classification, track. The oceanic sensation, you are these trees, you are this forest, you are the self. Can I cut this wood? It classifies, it tracks. This is the self, the being, it. You perceive, of course, the body perceives, perception comes, the stimulus comes, and I go through a process of perception. But in this process of perception, the self interprets. Yes, look how interesting. It doesn't matter what stimulus came to you. The same stimulus, which depends on the eye that you will have a different interpretation. The same stimulus coming to you or to me. And if I had a different culture, I would interpret the same stimulus differently because the eye interprets. So the being only perceives and the self makes the interpretation, okay? So I said in one of the live sessions in the blogs that I posted, I mentioned, for example, who studies EEG, electroencephalography, electroencephalography. In electroencephalography, it is almost a type of multimeter. I will measure voltages, differentiated voltages, but voltages throughout the head to measure what is the electrical signal that is coming out of the brain. I will measure. So, in fact, the EEG will measure the electromagnetic activities of the brain. It will basically measure the brain voltage, the current, the voltage it will measure. Okay. So, he will try to measure this entire electrical field of the brain within a doing, within a self doing. What are you doing? This electrical signal. And another device that also measures brain functions is NAS. NAS measures the level of hemoglobin oxide and dioxide. NAS will look at blood only in the cortex of the brain and put a little light on it, pass it to the brain's finger and see if there is more hemoglobin oxide or dioxide in the blood that is irrigating the neurons. Okay, but this is the body. It is not a function. It is a function in the sense that that area is being recruited more. But this is an energetic hemodynamic territory. It belongs to the being who you are. It is your metabolism which the function makes different. So the electrical part, if I put the being and the being, the EG would be seeing more or less the self that is active, not active, with electroencephalography waves, the me running, the me resting, the me sleeping. And the NIS will see something more, the blood, how the structure is, the structure of the being. It's an allegory that I make with you because it's easy to interpret, okay? So you will have this difference between being and B, you will always be in the self. It took me a while to understand this. And it's interesting when it's always going to be in a self, because sometimes the self, it has a structure, it controls attention. It depends on the self you are, and you need a self. You focus a lot. You are extremely focused on what needs to be done. It's your work, it's your business, it's your pleasure. You focused. When you focus, some stimuli, some information that is in the middle, you no longer notice because you focused, you expanded this focus of attention, amplified some signals, but diminished. It dampens other signals, okay? When you dampen or deny some information, remember the chorea sense? Chorea sense, the information arriving in all the cells, gives the sense of belonging. So now a self that is focused is not perceiving some information that is coming from the environment. So this self no longer belongs to this environment. It is isolated from the environment. Interesting, isn't it? So it's a me, but he's focused. Everyone is talking. I put on headphones. I'm listening to my music. I'm doing my work. Okay. But at that moment, you lost your belonging with everyone because the stimulus that reaches everyone is not the same stimulus that reaches you. So you left, you chose not to belong to the group. Why do I say this? And why is it important? Sometimes you will seek the search for belonging often is to make people value you. I know, and you must know some people who, to this day, even without a father or mother, want to be the favorite child in the house. But the father has already passed away, the mother has already passed away. Even so, he continues with the idea of trying to belong and be the best son in the family. Do you understand? This search for belonging, this search for recognition is of an ego. It's a me that grew up on top of this. It's a me that when I was little was like, look, you have to try to be better at school, a competitive education. You have to be better. You have to always be. Competitiveness is not a we, it's a me that has to stand out. It has to be better. It has to be the prettiest, the strongest, the most something. So this me, it will always have, it's functional. But then we put a lot of pressure on children that sometimes the child is not so intelligent, does not stand out even at that point, but you have to find a way. No, man, it is the being, this child, together with all of us, we are doing, we are getting around, we are walking, we are solving, we are evolving together at the level of everyone together, at the level of belonging. We are together, we belong to each other, we are one. And if you think about living beings on the planet, it's a living planet, and we are part of this living planet, and we are part of this greater being, let's say, that is all living beings together. Okay, we are part of this. Okay, but did you notice the being is this? And when you are in a self, you will simply restrict some functions based on your knowledge. Normally, the self has a language. If you learn Portuguese, it speaks Portuguese, right? Right? But I have consciousness, consciousness with words. Being is already a semiotic. Being is different. It has a deep meaning and a movement. The word hardly has it, but then he will use the word I and it comes in. Okay, let's go. When I use the word I, you introduce some visceral tensions because the I, in part, is a metabolism. It is a feeling that you learned and developed. Okay, but sometimes I got lost in the I. When do I lose myself, especially when I'm right? This is the way. And I'm right. At that moment when I am right, I put the wrong right and I will impose my right on everyone. Do you understand? And at that moment on this path, I have a physical tension, and this tension does not relax. And sometimes I spent a time in that phase where I had to prove to others that I was right so that I could have the feeling of being right. Until I proved to others that I was right, I did not have the feeling of being so right. Look how interesting. But there are other selves. There is a self that perceives itself and perceives itself in the being. If you seek your own perception, you will perceive yourself as the living being that you are. When you perceive yourself as the living being that you are, you continue to perceive yourself as a conservative Republican, a self that wants to replicate what it already knew. Okay, but it's with belonging, a little more metacognition, man. It's about respecting the body. In your body, things that the body cannot assume now, that the body cannot do. It will put too much tension on the body. It is a self that respects the being. So this self is a little more transcendent, but it is a self that respects the being so much that it knows that any idea it has is transitory. Any idea it has emanates into an action, into an attitude. that after this attitude has been carried out, has been completed, this self dissolves. It's over. And another one comes to do it at another time, because each moment will require a different technique, structure, and training from you. Each moment you will be different. And at the end of each moment of your accomplishment, of each moment of doing, you will dissolve. And when I say dissolve, for example, think of my shoulder here. Really dissolve. You will relax. You will become empty again, but empty. Not a void with pain, a void without visceral and postural tensions, a void ready to do it again, a clean void, a budding void, a void, the essence of life. The being returns to being with fullness, because if an I will call it an I, if an I started with you 8 o'clock in the morning, and it continues with the tension of the I 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when night comes, you will be with so much tension you will even have a headache, because at no time did you return to being without visceral tensions, without postural tensions. Completely freeing proprioception and interoception to return to the center where you can be flexible. I thought it was really cool that I had a conversation with my friend, Professor Sato, and he said, Jackson, there comes a time when the brain's connectums reach a critical position, and this critical position of brain connectums is the following. The connectomy can become any of the other connectomes very easily. It's a kind of transcendence where you can be in the being and you become any posture with much more ease. What am I talking about? Why am I saying this? When you finish taking your children to school, when you finish washing your children or doing an obligation that you had to do, when you finish doing it, it disappears. Disintegrate yourself for the other to enter. The other enters completely. Because if you have tension in your body holding something, the other does not enter completely. The other me, the other doing, the other existential feeling to do something, existential metabolism. The area is activated to have a better performance in a specific task. So that's what I wanted to leave with you today. When you can differentiate the great conflict from being and being, you know that you always are. Then you are always a living being until you die. When you die, it is over. But you always are. In this being that is pure presence, you have the doing. With each doing, you will activate an I. But this self, when it enters full of reason. It knows what is right and what is wrong. Yes, it is its own formation. It wants to replicate what is right and what is wrong because it is its formation. It enters, it does, it relaxes and makes your own self flexible, because you are always in the being, and you will flex the self that has just acted. But why will you flex? Because you did not hold resentment, did not hold tension, neither visceral nor postural. And the being returns, and the being returns to that environment, and the being perceives the space, feels. I'm talking about the mind, feels the interoception and proprioception distributed in a space. The mind is free. And now the other self comes and takes a bit of the load with spatial postures, with postures of what to say and how to move in that space, with cognitive postures. Of course, the self will seek cognitive processes. And when the self is threatened, for example, it enters a state of bullying, it will have a very large limitation of the prefrontal. It will be more somatosensory, pure emotion, pure action and reaction, because it is in a state of chaos. It is a reaction and reaction all the time. So it is a loaded self. When you finish this stage, since you are in a bad mood, when you leave, you go out, go get some water, go to recess in class, come back, try to get out of this I that was in a bad mood, that was being pressured. Then you go back to the classroom again. If you are a seventh or eighth grade student, talk to the teacher. Teacher, I'm getting very tense in class. And if you pay attention, you won't learn. You have to free yourself in each. And obviously, if you don't pay attention to the attentional focus during the class, you won't learn either. But if you pay a lot of attention, you won't learn either. It's magic. Living is magic. Living is a very beautiful thing. You will have to focus. You will seek this self with this focus. But after you finish doing it, you become flexible. It wasn't quite like that, and you optimize better, and then do it again. And each day that passes, you improve your self tools. You have a legion of self. And you are a being, and it is from the being that this legion emanates. In each action, in each moment, there is an I that will do something. Look, and there is my I, and there is your I, which is deplorable. It is very tense. It is very bad in the sense that it is not good for my body. In fact, it is not good for my being, but that I appears. Then we tolerate it, let it pass, let it pass. Look, relax. I can't produce anything else now. I'm going to sunbathe. I'm going to go out, I'm going to walk because things got complicated. This, I am very tense. Leave it, don't deny it. It will go normally for 40 minutes. If you don't deny an I, it will go away, okay? Your posture returns to normal. You start to become a little more focused slowly, using this self as a tool and not losing yourself. Being a self, look at your belief. It is the self that believes. Your habits are the self that has. Oh, so you know that blind faith is the automatism. I've been telling you about it for a long time, Rami. And here's what you do: you imitate, 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 and it becomes a habit. You only had a simple light synaptic connection, then this connection starts to form myelin and it gets faster. And then the connection is reinforced in such a way that it becomes almost an electrical connection. This is what I call high performance or blind faith. You no longer have a way. You can't help but make that connection, which is what happens now when I'm talking to you. The phonemes, I speak to you and you have phonemes in your head and the vocals are already connected. Your brain already works with the phonemes that I speak. I speak a bunch of phonemes in a word and you already understand the word very quickly. These connections are electrical in the brain. It's already very fast. It's in high performance. It's hard for you not to do or to deny a word that you are hearing, to deny its meaning, because these are very strong connections. So the self is this too. The self grows and it can be a very strong self, very fast. At the cerebral base, a very intense connection. Even so, you return to the being and question, what is this self? What faith do I have? Why am I not secular? How can I be? Because the self is trying to take over my entire body and take up the space of the being. No. Let's go. Secular, democratic, legal. But when a self comes, this self is Christian, this self is atheist, this self is Muslim, that's fine. When he comes, he goes back and relaxes and enjoys life, which is just one life. A big hug to you. See you on Wednesday. I hope you enjoyed it.